The burning sensation started in my throat, then spread like wildfire through my chest. I clutched the dinner table, my vision blurring as I stared at the empty plate that had held my favorite lasagna just moments before. Across from me, Victoria's emerald eyes watched with cold satisfaction, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against her wine glass. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I tried to speak, but only a strangled gasp escaped my lips. The room spun violently, and I collapsed to the marble floor of our shared dining room. Through my fading consciousness, I heard her soft laughter echoing off the walls. Finally, Victoria whispered, "Now Marcus will be mine alone." As darkness consumed me, my last thought was of my unborn child, the baby I'd never get to hold, never get to protect from this monster I'd been forced to call sister. But death wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. I jolted awake in my bed, gasping for air that filled my lungs completely. My hands flew to my throat. No burning, no pain. I was alive. But how? Sunlight streamed through the familiar bay windows of the bedroom I shared with Marcus in our Denver mansion. I sat up slowly, my heart racing as I took in every detail. The silk curtains Victoria had insisted on replacing last month. The family photo on the nightstand, showing Marcus, Victoria, and me at last year's charity gala. The calendar on the wall that made my blood run cold. March 15th, 3 weeks before my death. Impossible, I whispered, my voice trembling. I died on April 7th, 2024. I remembered everything. The taste of the lasagna, the burning poison, Victoria's triumphant smile. Yet here I was, very much alive, staring at a date that hadn't happened yet. I stumbled to the bathroom mirror, expecting to see the pale, weak woman I'd become in those final days. Instead, I saw myself as I was 3 weeks earlier, healthier, stronger, my dark hair still thick and lustrous. Even my pregnancy was less advanced, the small bump barely visible beneath my silk nightgown. "Sarah, are you okay in there?" Marcus's voice called from the hallway. My husband, the man I'd loved for 5 years, who'd brought Victoria into our lives as his second wife when I couldn't conceive quickly enough for his family's satisfaction. The man who'd been oblivious to his new wife's growing hatred for me. "I'm fine," I called back, my voice steadier than I felt. But I wasn't fine. I was reborn, given a second chance I never could have imagined. And this time, I knew exactly what was coming. The bedroom door opened, and Marcus walked in, adjusting his silver tie. At 35, he was still the handsome CEO who'd swept me off my feet at a business conference 6 years ago. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his blue eyes bright with the confidence of a man who'd never known real betrayal. "Victoria's making breakfast," he said, moving to kiss my forehead. She mentioned wanting to try that new recipe she found online. My stomach clenched. Even now, 3 weeks before my death, Victoria was already experimenting with ways to poison me. In my first life, I'd been so grateful for her domestic efforts, so naive about her true intentions. "Actually, I'm not feeling well," I said quickly. "Maybe I'll skip breakfast today." Marcus frowned, his hand moving to my forehead. "You do look pale. Should I call Dr. Henderson?" "No, just some morning sickness. I'll be fine." He nodded, though concern lingered in his eyes. "Take it easy today. Victoria can handle the household arrangements for tonight's dinner party." The dinner party. I'd forgotten about that. In my previous life, it had been the beginning of the end. The night Victoria had first tested a mild dose of poison in my wine, claiming it was just a new vintage that didn't agree with me. I'd been violently ill for days, and by the time I recovered, she'd already gained Marcus's complete trust as my caretaker. "Actually," I said carefully, "I think I'd like to help plan the menu myself this time." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Are you You've been letting Victoria handle most of the entertainment lately." Because I'd been slowly dying, I thought bitterly, because she'd been gradually poisoning me for months, making me too weak to fight back. "I'm sure. It's important to me." After Marcus left for his office at Brennan Industries, I made my way downstairs to the kitchen. The mansion's heart was a chef's dream. Granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and an herb garden visible through the window. Victoria stood at the stove, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, wearing a spotless white apron over her designer dress. She looked like the picture of domestic perfection, the devoted second wife, grateful for her place in our unconventional family. Only I knew the truth, that behind her sweet smile lurked a calculating killer who'd stop at nothing to have Marcus to herself. "Good morning, Sarah," she said without turning around. "I'm making your favorite blueberry pancakes." My favorite. How thoughtful. In my previous life, I would have been touched by the gesture. Now I know better. "That's very kind of you, Victoria, but I'm not feeling up to eating this morning." She turned then, her green eyes flashing with something that might have been annoyance before quickly shifting to concern. "Oh no! Is the morning sickness getting worse? I could make you some ginger tea instead." "No thank you. I'll just have some plain toast later." I watched her face carefully, noting the slight tightening around her eye. She'd already prepared whatever poison she'd planned to use, and my refusal was disrupting her timeline. "Well, if you change your mind, I'll keep some pancakes warm for you," she said, her smile never faltering. I spent the rest of the morning researching. In my previous life, I'd been too trusting, too focused on my pregnancy and my marriage to pay attention to the warning signs. This time, I will be prepared. I started with Victoria's background, something I'd never thought to investigate before. According to public records, Victoria Walsh had appeared in Marcus's life 18 months ago at a business conference in Chicago. She'd been working as an event coordinator, beautiful and charming, with no apparent family or close friends. But deeper digging revealed troubling gaps. No employment history before the event company, no college records, no childhood friends or social media presence. Beyond the past 2 years, it was as if Victoria Walsh had materialized from thin air, a woman with no past but very specific intentions for her future. By noon, I'd found what I was looking for. Buried in archived newspaper articles from small towns across the Midwest were stories of mysterious deaths. 3 men, all wealthy, all found dead in their homes under suspicious circumstances. All had been married to women who disappeared shortly after their deaths. Women who bore a striking resemblance to Victoria. My hands shook as I printed the articles. I wasn't her first victim. I was just the latest in a string of calculated murders, each one executed by a woman who specialized in becoming the perfect wife before becoming the perfect widow. But this time would be different. This time, I knew who she really was. The front door chimed, and I quickly closed my laptop as Victoria's voice echoed through the foyer. She'd been out shopping for tonight's dinner party, gathering ingredients for what I now knew would be another attempt to poison me. "Sarah, I'm back," she called sweetly. "I found the most wonderful fresh herbs at the farmer's market, perfect for tonight's menu." I made my way downstairs, my heart pounding but my face carefully composed. Victoria stood in the kitchen, unpacking bags of groceries. Among the items, I spotted a small glass vial tucked discreetly between the herb bundles. "What did you decide on for tonight?" I asked casually. "Oh, I thought we'd do something elegant but simple. Herb-crusted salmon with a special sauce I've been perfecting." Her eyes glittered with anticipation. "I think you'll find it absolutely unforgettable." "Unforgettable because it would have been my last meal." "That sounds lovely," I said, moving closer to examine her purchases. "What kind of herbs did you choose?" "Rosemary, thyme, and a few specialty items." She picked up the vial I'd noticed, handling it with practiced care. "This is a rare extract that adds the most incredible depth of flavor. Very concentrated. Just a few drops can transform an entire dish. A few drops could also transform a healthy pregnant woman into a corpse, but I kept that observation to myself." "Well, I'm sure our guests will be impressed," I said instead. "Marcus mentioned the Andersons and the Carlyles are coming. Among other 8 couples total, all very important to Marcus's business. Perfect witnesses to watch me collapse at my own dinner table." Victoria had planned this meticulously, just as she'd planned the deaths of her previous husbands, but this time she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd given me the chance to see it coming. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. As Victoria busied herself with preparations, I quietly photographed the vial and its contents. Later, I would have it analyzed. I would gather evidence. And when the time was right, I would make sure Victoria got exactly what she'd planned to give me. The afternoon passed in a strange dance of normalcy. Victoria prepared her poisonous feast while I pretended to rest. Marcus called to check on me, his voice warm with concern. Our guests would arrive at 7, expecting an elegant evening with Denver's most successful polygamous family. They would certainly have a memorable dinner party. Just not the one Victoria had planned. As the sun began to set over the Rocky Mountains, I stood in my walk-in closet choosing my outfit for the evening. In my previous life, I'd worn a flowing maternity dress in soft blue. Something comfortable and forgiving. Tonight I selected a fitted black dress that accentuated my still small bump and made me look stronger, more formidable. Victoria Walsh thought she was dealing with the same naive, trusting woman she'd been slowly killing for months. But Sarah Brennan died on April 7th. The woman getting dressed for dinner was someone entirely different. Someone who knew the truth, who had seen the future, and who was ready to rewrite it. I touched my belly gently, feeling the flutter of life within. My baby would live. Marcus would learn the truth about his perfect second wife. And Victoria would finally face the consequences of her deadly games. The game was about to begin again. But this time I would be the one hold. The dinner party began at 7 sharp. Our guests arriving in their luxury vehicles. Unaware they were about to witness the unraveling of a murderer, I greeted each couple with practiced charm. The Andersons from Marcus's board of directors, the Carlyles who owned half of Denver's real estate empire, and 6 other influential families whose presence would make tonight's events impossible to cover up. Victoria played her role perfectly, the gracious hostess in her emerald silk gown, accepting compliments on the exquisite table settings and aromatic dishes emerging from our kitchen. She'd outdone herself. Crystal gleamed under the chandelier, white roses adorned every surface, and the scent of her herb-crusted salmon filled the dining room. "Sarah, you look radiant," Mrs. Anderson commented as we moved to the dining room. "Pregnancy suits you beautifully. Thank you, Helen. I've never felt better." The irony wasn't lost on me in my previous life. I'd been pale and weak by this point. The months of gradual poisoning taking their toll. Marcus stood at the head of our mahogany dining table, raising his wine glass. To family, friendship, and the future, he toasted, his eyes warm as they met mine across the room. Victoria smiled brilliantly, but I caught the calculating glint in her eyes as she surveyed our guests. These people represented power, influence, and most importantly, witnesses to what she believed would be my final performance. "Please, everyone, take your seats," Victoria announced. "Dinner is ready." I moved toward my usual chair, the one Victoria had carefully positioned closest to the kitchen for easy access. In my previous life, she'd made several trips back and forth, each time adding another drop of poison to my water glass or touching my food with contaminated fingers. "Actually," I said, stopping mid-step, "Victoria, you've worked so hard tonight. Please, take the seat of honor." Her smile faltered almost imperceptibly. "Oh no, Sarah. I couldn't. You're Marcus's first wife. I insist." I pulled out the chair I'd been meant to occupy, the one with the perfect view of the kitchen, the one where she could monitor my every bite. "After all your preparation, you deserve to be celebrated." The guests murmured their agreement, praising Victoria's efforts. She had no choice but to accept graciously, though I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she sat down. I took her intended seat instead, directly across from her, where I could watch every expression cross her face. Marcus settled at the head of the table, beaming with pride at his 2 wives working in such harmony. If only he knew. The first course was served, a delicate butternut squash soup that Victoria had prepared hours earlier. I watched as she hesitated over her own bowl, her spoon hovering uncertainly. "This smells incredible, Victoria." I said loudly enough for the entire table to hear. What's your secret ingredient? Her green eyes met mine across the table, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty. Just traditional herbs and spices. Nothing special. Oh, but there must be something that makes it so unique, that distinctive aftertaste you mentioned earlier. I took a deliberate spoonful, maintaining eye contact. Victoria's complexion paled. She'd made the soup before I'd switched our seats, and she couldn't remember which bowls had been tainted. For all she knew, she was about to poison herself. I think I'll wait for the main course, she said, setting down her spoon. I want to make sure everything's perfect before I eat. The conversation flowed around us as our guests enjoyed their soup, discussing business deals and upcoming social events. I participated cheerfully, all while watching Victoria grow increasingly agitated. She barely touched her food, her eyes darting between the kitchen and the dining room as if calculating her next move. When the salmon course arrived, I was ready. Victoria, this presentation is absolutely stunning, I announced, standing to photograph the elaborate platter with my phone. Marcus, you simply must get a picture of your wife's masterpiece. As Marcus fumbled for his phone, I moved behind Victoria's chair, ostensibly to get a better angle. In reality, I carefully switched our plates, ensuring she received the portion she'd specially prepared for me. There, I said, returning to my seat. Now we can all enjoy this feast properly. Victoria stared down at her plate, her face now ashen. The herb crust glistened under the chandelier lights, perfectly golden and undeniably beautiful. It was also, I knew with absolute certainty, deadly. Victoria, aren't you eating? Mrs. Carlyle asked with concern. You've barely touched anything all evening. I'm just so excited to see everyone else enjoy the meal. Victoria stammered. Sometimes when you cook, you lose your appetite. Nonsense, Marcus declared. You've outdone yourself tonight. Here, let me cut you a proper bite. Before Victoria could protest, Marcus had carved a generous portion of her salmon and held it on his fork. Try it. The entire table watched expectantly. Victoria had positioned herself as the devoted chef, the perfect hostess. To refuse now would seem bizarre, potentially suspicious. Her hand shook as she accepted the fork from Marcus. The salmon trembled on the tines, that special herb crust she'd so carefully prepared catching the light. Actually, I interjected smoothly, I'd love to try some too. Victoria, would you mind sharing? The aroma is absolutely intoxicating. I reached across the table with my own fork, spearing a piece from her plate. Our eyes locked as I brought it to my lips, the same lips she'd watched turn blue 3 weeks in the future. Sarah, no. Victoria started, half rising from her chair. What's wrong? I asked innocently, the fork hovering near my mouth. Is there something I should know about this particular preparation? The table fell silent. Every guest turned to look at Victoria, whose panic was now impossible to hide. Her perfectly composed mask had cracked, revealing the desperate killer beneath. I think it might be too rich for you, given your condition, she said weakly. How thoughtful, I smiled. But I'm feeling surprisingly strong tonight. Stronger than I have in months. Actually, I took the bite, chewing slowly, savoring both the taste and the expression of absolute horror on Victoria's face. The salmon was delicious, perfectly seasoned, expertly prepared. The poison she'd added was virtually undetectable. Almost. There's something very distinctive about this flavor, I mused. Something I can't quite place. Victoria, what exactly did you use in that special extract you mentioned? Extract? Marcus looked confused. What extract? Victoria's breathing became shallow. She was trapped, surrounded by witnesses, holding a fork full of her own poison, while I calmly consumed what should have been my death sentence. What she didn't know was that I'd spent the afternoon preparing. While she'd been at the farmer's market gathering her supplies, I'd made a crucial discovery in her private bathroom, a small vial of activated charcoal tablets, the kind used to neutralize poisons. Victoria had been protecting herself all along, taking the antidote before each of our meals. I'd taken 6 tablets before dinner. The poison would make me sick, but it wouldn't kill me. Victoria, however, had no such protection. You know, I continued conversationally, I found the most interesting articles today about unexplained deaths in several Midwest towns. Men who died suddenly after eating meals prepared by their wives. Wives who disappeared shortly after the funeral. Victoria's fork clattered to her plate. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Just like you don't know about James Morrison, who died in Kansas City 2 years ago. Or Robert Fleming in Omaha 3 years before that. Or David Chen, in Minneapolis, 5 years ago. The names hit their mark. Victoria's face went from pale to gray, and she gripped the edge of the table as if to steady herself. Sarah, what are you saying? Marcus demanded, his voice sharp with confusion and growing alarm. I'm saying that your second wife isn't who she claims to be. I'm saying that Victoria Walsh is a serial killer who specializes in poisoning wealthy husbands. And I'm saying that the salmon on her plate contains the same poison she's been feeding me for months. The dining room erupted in gasps and shocked murmurs. Several guests pushed back from the table, their eyes wide with horror. That's insane, Victoria whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Sarah, you're clearly having some kind of breakdown. Am I? I pulled out my phone, displaying the photos I'd taken of her poison vial. Then perhaps you can explain this? Or maybe you'd like to tell us about the life insurance policies you helped Marcus set up last month. The ones that make you the beneficiary if I die. Marcus stared at his second wife, as if seeing her for the first time. Victoria, is this true? She looked around the table at the faces staring back at her. Some horrified, some fascinated, all bearing witness to her exposure. The perfect crime she'd orchestrated so many times before was crumbling around her. You can't prove anything, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Actually, I can. While you were shopping today, I had a friend in the lab analyze samples from that vial you so carefully hid. Aconitine extract, derived from monkshood plants. Virtually tasteless, nearly undetectable, and absolutely fatal in the right dosage. Victoria's breathing became labored. The poison was working faster than she'd anticipated. Probably because she'd prepared a stronger dose for what she'd intended to be my final meal. The irony is beautiful, isn't it? I stood slowly, my hand resting protectively on my belly. You've spent months perfecting the art of murder, and tonight you're finally getting to experience your own masterpiece. Help me, Victoria gasped, reaching toward Marcus. Please. I can't breathe. Marcus looked torn between horror and disbelief, but he was already reaching for his phone to call 911. Don't bother, I said calmly. I've already called them. They should be here any moment to collect evidence and arrest our guest of honor. As if summoned by my words, the sound of sirens filled the night air. Red and blue lights flashed through our dining room windows as police cars surrounded the mansion. Victoria collapsed forward onto the table, her perfect blonde hair spilling across the white roses, her emerald dress a stark contrast to her now blue lips. She was experiencing exactly what I had 3 weeks in the future. The burning throat, the racing heart, the desperate struggle for air. The difference was, I'd gotten justice, and my baby will live to see tomorrow. The paramedics burst through our front doors, as Victoria's body convulsed against the dining room table. Her perfectly manicured fingers clawed at her throat, the same desperate gesture I'd made in my previous life. But, unlike my death, this one had an audience of Denver's elite watching in horrified fascination. Step back, everyone. Detective Ray Morrison commanded as he entered behind the medical team. I'd called him earlier that afternoon, sharing my evidence and requesting his presence at what I'd described as an urgent matter requiring immediate police attention. He surveyed the scene, our elegantly set table now in chaos, guests huddled in shocked clusters, and Victoria Walsh writhing in her final moments. His experienced eyes took in every detail, from the switched plates to my unnaturally calm demeanor. Mrs. Brennan, he addressed me directly, You mentioned evidence of attempted murder when you called. Completed murder, actually, I replied, watching as the paramedics fought to save Victoria's life. Just not the victim she intended. Marcus stood frozen beside Victoria's chair, his face a mask of betrayal and confusion. Sarah, what the hell is happening? How did you know to call the police? Instead of answering him directly, I pulled out my phone and displayed the documents I'd compiled throughout the day. Detective Morrison, I believe you'll find these quite illuminating. Financial records, identity documents, and testimony from Dr. Patricia Wells at Denver General Hospital. The detective's eyebrows rose as he scrolled through the files. Dr. Wells examined you today. This afternoon. Blood work confirmed the presence of aconitine in my system, trace amounts that had been building up over months of gradual poisoning. She also documented evidence of chronic exposure to digital ass and ricin. Victoria's convulsions were weakening. The poison was working exactly as she'd designed it to, swift, efficient, and irreversible. The paramedics worked frantically, but we all knew their efforts were futile. You planned this, Marcus whispered, his voice hollow with realization. You knew she was going to poison you tonight. I knew because she'd already succeeded once, I said quietly. 3 weeks from now, to be precise. The statement sent murmurs rippling through our dinner guests. Some began backing toward the exits, but Detective Morrison's officers had already positioned themselves at every door. I'm afraid everyone will need to remain for questioning, Morrison announced. This is now a crime scene. Mrs. Anderson, still clutching her wine glass, spoke up tremulously. Sarah, dear, what do you mean she already succeeded? You're standing right here. For the first time that evening, I felt the weight of what I was about to reveal. These people knew me as the successful businesswoman, the devoted wife, the soon-to-be mother. They had no framework for understanding what I'd experienced. Have any of you ever wondered what happens when we die? I asked, meeting each of their eyes in turn. Whether consciousness continues, whether unfinished business can bring us back. Sarah, you're scaring me, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. I moved to the sideboard where Victoria had displayed tonight's menu, written in her flowing script. Beside it sat a newspaper, today's Denver Post, dated March 15, 2024. Victoria poisoned me on April 7, 2024. I began, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was sharing. I died in agony on our kitchen floor, while she watched with satisfaction. My baby died with me. The silence in the room was absolute except for the labored breathing of the dying woman and the quiet murmur of the paramedics' failed efforts. But somehow, I woke up this morning, in this exact bed, on this exact date, with complete knowledge of what was to come, every detail, every conversation, every deadly plan she'd made. Detective Morrison studied me intently. Mrs. Brennan, what you're describing sounds like a fantasy? Like a psychological break? I thought so too, until I started researching Victoria's past. Until I found the other victims. I gestured toward Victoria, whose breathing had become shallow and irregular. That woman has killed at least 5 men across the Midwest over the past decade. She assumes new identities, marries wealthy men, gains their trust, and then slowly poisons them to inherit their fortunes. But Marcus isn't dead, Mr. Carlyle pointed out, his legal mind trying to process the logic. Because I was in the way. Marcus loved me, trusted me, confided in me about business matters. As long as I lived, Victoria would only be the second wife. Important, but not indispensable. My death would have devastated Marcus, made him completely dependent on her comfort and support. Marcus sank into a chair, the full horror of his situation becoming clear. She would have killed me next. Within 6 months, I confirmed. After a suitable period of grief, you would have had a tragic accident. A car crash, perhaps, or a slip in the shower. Victoria would have inherited everything as your grieving widow. One of the paramedics looked up from Victoria's still form. She's gone. The finality of those words settled over the room like a shroud. Victoria Walsh, or whatever her real name had been, was dead. killed by her own weapon, the victim of her own expertise. There's something else you all need to understand, I continued, my hand moving protectively to my belly. In my previous life, I lost my baby. Victoria's poison killed both of us. This child represents not just my second chance but an innocent life that was stolen and has now been saved. Dr. Patricia Wells, whom I'd contacted earlier, chose that moment to arrive. She'd agreed to come as my witness to verify the medical evidence of Victoria's crimes. Detective Morrison, she announced herself to the room. I'm here about the toxicology results Mrs. Brennan requested. She opened her medical bag and withdrew a thick file. I'd been treating Mrs. Brennan for months for what we believed were pregnancy complications, severe nausea, fatigue, irregular heartbeat. Today's blood work revealed the true cause. Dr. Wells handed the detective several lab reports. Multiple toxins in her system, all administered in carefully measured doses over an extended period. Someone was very methodically poisoning this woman. How is that possible? Marcus demanded. I ate the same meals, drank from the same bottles of wine. Because Victoria was incredibly careful, I explained. She poisoned my personal items, my water bottle, my prenatal vitamins, even my favorite tea that I drank every morning. Things only I would consume. Detective Morrison nodded grimly. We'll need to collect all of those items as evidence. Mrs. Brennan, I have to ask, if what you're telling us is true, if you somehow knew this was going to happen, why didn't you simply leave? Why engineer this confrontation? The question I'd been expecting. The one that would determine whether I was seen as a victim who'd defended herself or a calculating killer who'd executed premeditated murder. Because Victoria wouldn't have stopped, I said simply. Even if I'd disappeared, she would have found another way to get to Marcus. She would have killed again. How many more innocent people would have died while she perfected her techniques and accumulated more wealth? I gestured toward the evidence, scattered across our dining table. And because the legal system would never have convicted her based on suspicion alone, she was too careful, too practiced. The only way to stop her was to let her reveal her true nature to witnesses who couldn't be silenced or dismissed. Mrs. Anderson spoke up, her voice shaky but determined. We all saw her try to stop Sarah from eating that fish. We all heard her admit to using some kind of extract. And we all watched her refuse to eat her own cooking, added Mr. Carlyle. In 30 years of legal practice, I've never seen such clear evidence of intent to commit murder. Detective Morrison closed his notebook with a snap. Mrs. Brennan, you'll need to come to the station for a full statement. But based on what I've witnessed here tonight, and the evidence Dr. Wells has provided, it appears you acted in self-defense against a serial killer. As the body was removed and our guests gave their statements, Marcus finally approached me. His face was haggard, aged by the events of the evening, and the knowledge of how close he'd come to losing everything. Sarah, he said quietly, I don't understand what happened to you, how you knew, but I need you to know something. I waited, unsure what confession or apology might come. I never loved her, he continued. Not the way I love you. The marriage was practical, family pressure, business considerations, but I never stopped loving you. I studied his face, seeing the truth there, the relief mixed with horror. I know, that's why she had to kill me first. 3 hours later, as dawn broke over Denver, our mansion was finally quiet. The police had finished their investigation, the body had been removed, and our guest had departed with a story that would dominate Denver society for years to come. I stood in our bedroom, looking out at the mountains, painted gold by the rising sun. My baby was safe, my husband was alive and finally aware of the danger we'd escaped. And somewhere in the space between death and rebirth, justice had been served. Marcus appeared behind me, his arms encircling my waist, his hands resting on the small life growing within me. What happens now? He asked. Now we live, I said simply. We raise our child, we rebuild our marriage on truth instead of secrets. And we remember that sometimes the universe gives us exactly the second chance we need. In my reflection in the window, I could see both versions of myself. The naive woman who'd died trusting the wrong person, and the reborn warrior who'd saved not just her own life, but the lives of future victims. Victoria Walsh was gone, but Sarah Brennan, the real Sarah Brennan, was finally, truly alive. And this time, I intended to stay that way. Looking for more? We've got two amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.